I was angry, not at him, but basically at the world, that something like that could happen and it could just be kept quiet.
There was no way that in those days that you could actually say what happened, because they would not have believed him.
My name is Rees Mann. My wife and I met when we were 14, and we got married when I was 23. We love each other and we have 2 fantastic daughters. At times, I've wondered about talking about what had happened to me. That American thing. Let's talk about it. My dad is British and my mom is South African. That combination led me to believe that feelings and emotions are to be kept to yourself, not shown. How wrong I was.
It wasn't love at first sight, but we met, we were childhood sweethearts, both at school, teenagers when we met. We met at a place called the Sky Rink.
I grew up in the southern suburbs of Johannesburg. I'm one of 5.
I felt it was easier growing up to communicate with my mom more than my dad, because I felt that my mom would listen and try to understand more.
We did used to go rollerblading and do the odd fun thing, but it was, my father worked a lot and he kept himself busy a lot. So there was a lot of time where I felt that he was preoccupied, which I understand now. It was his way of dealing with something to keep his mind busy on other things.
He was a really good father. There was nothing I felt like that alarmed me, that he was extremely different from other fathers. He was a bit more overprotective, but very loving.
My relationship with my children was on a very father-parent basis. I was very protective over them. Looking back, I was overprotective.
It had a different effect on me than it did on my sister. My sister saw his sternness as the end of the line. A no was a no. And me as a teenager, I was a lot more rebellious. So I saw a no as in, that's going to be a yes. I'm going to push you and fight with you as much as I changed that into a yes. It was almost a challenge to me, which made me quite a bratty teenager.
Rees eventually landed up in therapy as a result of our daughter Bronwyn. She was experiencing some learning problems at school, and the teachers thought it would be advisable for her to go for testing. And part of the procedure was to also take her to a psychologist to see if there wasn't anything that was specifically worrying her.
From that, the psychologist needed to consult with my parents separately and see what their view of my situation was. And it was through that situation that my dad landed up opening up to the psychologist in his private appointments with her, which were originally meant to shed light on my situation.
Talking about your issues to a total stranger is not something that I was brought up thinking has been a possibility. My whole life I have never told anybody what happened to me. Some of the images that happened to me occasionally flashed in my mind. It was small little flashbacks, but the very traumatic ones were the ones where I would actually be paralyzed in bed. My eyes would be wider open. I'd be in absolute cold sweat. Fear is never felt before. I then worked harder and started new projects, so I had no time for those thoughts. Over time, I realized I must put the puzzle together or my past would destroy me. You can spend your whole life on a roller coaster pretending everything is fine. Eventually, something has to give.
Eventually, the therapist said to him, "Now, Rees, tell me the truth. What is the secret you're keeping?" And that's when eventually Rees started facing his demons.
The main reason that Rees decided to open up the way he related it to me was in respect of his relationships to his family in particular, and how the abuse had affected his relationship with his family. Also related to the amount he worked, okay, so the fact that he worked so hard and filled all his time, and also in relation to certain situations that were related to the abuse that he found very difficult to go into again. So he was avoidant of certain social situations as a result of being abused.
He used to come back from therapy and he would tell me what they discussed, avoiding, of course, the issue that was really being discussed, you know. I don't think it's that he didn't trust me. Is maybe he didn't trust himself with giving out that information. You know, how was he going to react to it?
The biggest reason of trying to put together all of these pieces of the puzzles in my life is that I'd be able to run a normal life without these incidents and past experiences affecting my life. And I think I was very fearful of where I could land up if I didn't deal with this.
We were married about 15 years. He said to me, "I have to tell you something." And I said, "Yes," you know, and not knowing what to expect. He said to me, "I have to tell you that I need to go on antidepressants because I was abused." And I was shocked.
I was 13 on a soccer tour, and as I got intoxicated, that I landed up in a hotel room that was not mine, but in the same hotel, and I was abused. And I think that I did not report it to anybody and pretended the next morning like it didn't happen because of the fear of what other people would have thought of me, and I think would they have believed me.
And then later on in his high school, again the rugby coach, who was also his Afrikaans teacher, who gave him extra Afrikaans lessons. And I don't know if you understand the grooming process with sexual abuse, is especially with a child, is that they actually, your perpetrator starts grooming you. So he made friends with Rees's parents. He was this very helpful teacher that was giving him extra Afrikaans lessons free of charge, you know, giving up his time. And he was clever the way he chose Rees from this very happy, stable family, you know.
Remembering I was raised in a very sexist household, believed that men are tough, cowboys don't cry, and feelings are for girls. Looking back, I was always told to respect authority. I did, and that is why I could be groomed by a teacher in this way. During the 70s and 80s, all white male South Africans were conscripted into the South African Defence Force. If you didn't go, your option was a 10 to 15 year sentence. So it was very difficult for you to make the decision of what you're going to do. My decision was to go to the Air Force. I ended up going to in those days, Southwest African, now called Namibia, Angolan border. I was shipped out there and I hated it. It was a war that was taking place that I totally disapproved of. We used to get drunk quite often, but this specific night I got really intoxicated. I think it was just getting to me. Everything was just getting to me, and you were just trying to drown any type of feelings. And walking back from where we were across the runway, I passed the mess, which is the eating facilities, and I got grabbed by a group of males and pulled into a building.
It was very brutal. Rees has a very bad scar on his head. He fought and they gang raped him.
That night was probably one of the longest, loneliest nights of my life, and I knew exactly what had happened to me, and I was too intoxicated to remember their faces. But the one thing that I do remember is I do remember the smell, and I do remember the smell of their sweat. And when it was all done, I was discarded like an animal, and I sat in a shower for hours and hours and hours. I didn't feel like a human, the way I was just dumped like an animal, like a dog. I think I just felt like I was, first of all, no longer human, and then secondly, I felt like I was no longer a male. I certainly couldn't report it, because it would have been, I probably would have been the one court-martialed for undermining the authority of the state or trying to put the military into disrespect. Knowing that my wife, or to-be wife, was waiting for me at home, and I had a loving family at home, that was the most important thing in my life. I think the decision I made was not to say a word to anybody and not to report it, and that's what I did. That was the last time I had been hopelessly drunk. My trust for males disappeared. So did my tolerance for people who were tipsy or drunk. There's no forgiveness coming from my side. Maybe if one day they approached me and they came and asked me for forgiveness, the situation would be different.
Initially it was just shock, that this guy who's always in control of everything, that this has happened to him. Almost, I did believe him, but it's always almost surreal, unbelievable.
I decided to tell my children when they were both turned 18, because I didn't want it to affect their perception of their own growing up, and I didn't want it to affect their own perception of sexuality.
When my dad opened up to us, at first there was a lot of healing that needed to happen, and after that I feel that it's helped our family so much to be a lot more real with each other when we talk to each other and share our feelings.
Because of the way society is, I'm sure it's been very difficult for my father to be open about what has happened to him, because a lot of people have this stereotype and the wrong facts. It was just very like a frustrating thing to have to hear that something like that could have happened. So it was just a very emotional thing for me, and for me as well as for my father to tell me.
He's learned to handle it, and I think the fact that he's now started Samsosa, he feels what's happened to him, let something good come of it.
I think from a personal level, starting your own foundation and starting Samsosa helps you in that it moves you from that big step from survivor to thriver, that it gives you an opportunity to put and assist other people who've been through similar circumstances as you have.
Every time a guy walks in there with their story and he hears their story, it's another thing that he has to that reminds him of what happened to him. So it's very important that when you counsel somebody, you have to be counseled as well. And Rees has actually got somebody that he then is counseled by.
I've always wanted to climb Kilimanjaro, but it wasn't until I went to Scarborough and did 2 training sessions and 1 weekend with fellow survivors that I actually really found out what my real purpose was. On a very personal level, it was to prove my own masculinity. And a lot of people will not understand that, but when you've been raped, the very essence of your manhood has been taken away from you, and you seem to be subconsciously always trying to prove that you are a real man.
There is no one definition for a real man. there is no need to define a real man. Why should we all live to reach a definition of a specific person? Shouldn't we all just live on moral grounds and do the best that we can in the situation that we are in? I don't think defining a real man I think it's counterproductive.
I never, ever had a little feeling that he was less of a man. I think he was more of a man. He was a braver man, a stronger man.
I think everybody's life is continuously a journey, and I think my dad is still on the path to recovery from the impact that it has made in his life, and I don't think that the journey has stopped, and I don't think it ever will. But that's not a bad thing. I think it gets better each day and it gets easier.
There'll always be that scar tissue, but we've learned to deal with it.
He never gave up, and he always stuck to what he believed in, and with his gut feeling, and I'm so grateful for that, and that's why we truly believe he's an amazing man.
I found the puzzle, and I found all the puzzle pieces. Not all of them, found most of them, and I found sufficient of them. Up to today, the puzzle is not complete, but it is complete enough to be a survivor.